my God! Oh my God!
Today, we will use a scientific perspective to explore the complex truth behind meteorological events. The shot in front of me is not a scene from a doomsday movie, but a scene that took place in California, USA, on December 28th. From a distance, the waves don't look so fierce, but they actually contain terrifying giant beasts. The moment the huge wave reached people's heads, everyone realized that the astonishing wave flew at least 6 meters high, far above their heads. But at this moment, people on the beach can only panic and run for their lives. The next second, the waves landed directly and swallowed up this quiet seaside town. According to the latest news from ABC, huge waves and coastal flooding have caused serious damage to many coastal communities in California for the third consecutive day. Extreme conditions have forced people to conduct water rescues, washed away cars, and injured some onlookers. Some surfers even tried to challenge, but ultimately failed. We have seen reports from multiple news sources that 8 people were missing and died due to the incident. However, we checked through various sources and found that the real situation is that at least 8 people were injured and sent to the hospital. At the same time, 20 tourists watching the waves were briefly injured by the waves. Rushed away, no one was killed for now. There is no danger. This is the best news as the new year approaches. I also avoid rumors here and hope to convey real information to the audience. Thank you for liking, leaving comments, subscribing and turning on the little bell. We will update every day. The unusually large wave, which reached more than 20 feet high, closed beaches along the California coast and brought damaging flooding to multiple oceanfront streets, homes, and businesses. In hard-hit Ventura County, waves crashed over the seawall, pushing cars parked on the street into important intersections and blocking the path of first responders, Fire Chief Brian said. Flooding at a local hotel also damaged all ground floor rooms. High water levels and dangerous rip currents have been plaguing much of the west coast from Southern California to Oregon since Thursday, caused by a series of powerful storms that came ashore from the Pacific Ocean. The calm ocean was instantly disturbed, and days of warm temperatures caused sea levels to rise significantly. While danger will decrease in Northern California on Saturday, coastal areas of Central and Southern California will continue to be buffeted by extreme waves, which could reach about 25 feet in affected areas. Some of the waves hitting California's Bay Area could reach a whopping 40 feet, with peaks about the size of telephone poles, while other waves are expected to reach 28 to 33 feet. The southern Oregon coast will also be buffeted by strong surf and winds early Saturday. Wave heights in the area are expected to be between 20 and 25 feet Saturday morning. Ventura County officials have closed all beaches on New Year's Eve. The county, along with Hermosa, Manhattan, and Palos Verdes beaches, faced the strongest surf Saturday and was at risk for severe coastal flooding. Curious onlookers and excited surfers were attracted by the spectacular surf, but local officials urged people to stay out of the water and stay off the beach because of possible life-threatening dangers. In recent times, the United States is not the only one to be hit by huge waves. Our channel reported on the huge wave incident in Russia on November 28th. At that time, a storm in the Black Sea region of Russia caused roads to be flooded and trees to be blown down. Power lines were pulled down, and more than 1.9 million people in Crimea were without power. The head of Russia's state meteorological service said the storm that hit Crimea was the most powerful on record. An aquarium in the Crimean port city of Sevastopol was flooded with nearly 800 exotic fish, including barracudas and piranhas, suffering from thermal shock, the aquarium director said, and in danger. Several cities in Crimea immediately entered a state of emergency. Emergency services said the severe weather left up to 25 centimeters of snow in some areas, plunging nearly 1,500 towns and villages into darkness. As many as 840 cars had to be towed away. At least 1,370 trucks are currently stuck. Part of the coastal highway connecting the cities of Yevpatoria and Simferopol in Crimea, Russia, was closed due to flooding, and ferry services to Crimea's largest city, Sevastopol, were also suspended. Traffic was blocked on 14 highways. In southern Russia, the Caspian Pipeline Alliance halted crude loading at the port of Novorossiysk due to extremely adverse weather conditions, with winds of up to 86 kilometers per hour and waves up to 8 meters high. Meanwhile, a cargo ship carrying 21 crew members ran aground near the town of Anapa on Russia's Black Sea coast. In recent years, huge wave events have occurred frequently around the world, and the reasons behind them are complex. The first is meteorological reasons. Strong cyclonic weather systems such as typhoons and hurricanes can produce extreme winds and low pressure on the ocean. When strong winds blow over the sea surface for a long period of time, the sea water will continue to gather, and the waves will continue to overlap, eventually forming huge waves and wild waves. The energy in these waves is very high and the propagation speed is also fast. Once it encounters land or rocks, it will hit violently. Weather systems with gradually increasing pressure may also cause large waves and rough seas. When the air pressure changes drastically at the junction of cold and warm air masses, the driving force of the air pressure will cause abnormal surges in the sea surface, causing huge waves. These giant waves are larger, travel longer, and are more destructive. Secondly, it is the geological reasons of the seabed. Undersea earthquakes are the main geological cause. The uplift or decline of the seabed caused by crustal movement, as well as geological activities such as volcanic eruptions, will generate a large amount of energy on the seafloor. This energy spreads through the water body, causing abnormal fluctuations in the sea surface, and gradually evolves into tall tsunamis or huge waves. The tsunami caused by the Chilean earthquake in 1960 had waves reaching more than 10 meters. At the same time, the rapid decline of submarine mountains will also generate huge energy and trigger huge waves. Large-scale collapse of land and mountains into the sea, or unexpected overall collapse of submarine canyons and trenches, may trigger huge waves of tens of meters, causing devastating blows to coastal areas. Whether it is meteorological or geological reasons, the fundamental driving force that ultimately causes huge waves and tsunamis is the sudden conversion of gravitational potential energy into kinetic energy. During the vertical movement of air or water, gravitational potential energy is released and converted into kinetic energy of horizontal movement, which in turn triggers abnormal fluctuations in the sea surface. In the propagation of these abnormal waves, wave energy continues to accumulate and the wave speed is also accelerating. Eventually, a huge wave or tsunami is formed that is extremely large and spreads extremely fast. The extremely high kinetic and potential energy they contain will have devastating consequences once they reach land. In addition, The existence of internal waves in the ocean is also an important mechanism for the formation of huge waves and abnormal tides. Internal waves mainly exist in buildings with seawater consistency and can propagate extremely long distances. When multiple orbital internal waves meet, energy accumulation and wave amplitude amplification will occur. It may eventually evolve into huge and abnormal sea surface fluctuations. Therefore, whether it is strong cyclone systems such as typhoons and hurricanes, or geological events such as submarine earthquakes and mountain collapses, or even the interaction of waves within the ocean, they can generate extremely high kinetic energy giant waves or waves by stimulating and gathering gravitational potential energy in the ocean. Tsunamis cause devastating disasters to coastal areas. What's more important is that when huge waves hit the coast, they will form powerful rip currents. This is because when the waves hit the shore, the sea water will have a strong horizontal movement. When waves refract, roll, and collide, this part of the horizontal momentum is quickly converted into movement perpendicular to the coast, forming an upwelling surge. Then, under the action of gravity and friction, this part of the seawater will fall back into the sea in an almost falling manner. During the backflow process, it is accelerated again, forming high-speed water flow away from the coast. This is a rip current. Because the seawater in front of the wave curve moves very fast, the rip current formed also has a high flow speed. Its flow direction is nearly vertical away from the coastline. This allows rip currents to carry sand and other bottom materials to the bay area or offshore deep water areas. Not only that, when successive huge waves hit the shore one after another, a rhythmic rip current pulse will be formed. The process of rising and falling seawater is repeated continuously, each time pushing new high-speed rip currents, thereby taking away more sand and other substrates. If a storm surge is encountered, the intensity of the rip current will further increase. More importantly, the rip currents formed by huge waves hitting the shore are extremely strong, which will cause many dangers to human activities and the offshore ecological environment. First of all, it will pose a huge threat to swimmers and water sports enthusiasts in the coastal waters. The speed of rip current is as high as 1 to 2 meters per second, which is far faster than the swimming speed of ordinary people. If you lose your buoyancy or become exhausted, you can easily be pulled toward the deep sea by rip currents. No matter how hard you try, you can't save yourself. This is the most direct lethality of huge wave rip currents. Secondly, strong rip currents will also pose a threat to people driving small boats and sailboats offshore. Small boats can easily get caught in rip currents, lose control, and end up capsizing or hitting rocks. People on board will fall into the sea immediately, and even if they are rescued, they may face various injuries such as hypothermia. At the same time, long-term rip currents will also change the nearshore topography. A large amount of sand and gravel were transported by rip currents, the coastline retreated, and nearby buildings were eroded and endangered. Some facilities may collapse, posing hidden dangers to people's lives and property. What cannot be ignored is that the sand and gravel sediment drifting in the rip current may also block offshore waterways and hinder shipping. Or it may cause sedimentation in the port and reduce the number of berths. This will seriously affect the local economy. It is worth mentioning that strong rip currents will change the near-ocean environment and harm the ecosystem. A large amount of silt is lost, making it difficult for coral reefs to survive and bottom organisms unable to gain a foothold, which will seriously damage the biodiversity of coastal waters. In addition, dangerous substances entrained in rip currents may also accumulate in offshore areas, causing unpredictable ecological risks. Recent studies have shown that pollutants from nuclear leaks and oil leaks can spread thousands of miles away through rip currents. When huge waves hit the coast, in order to minimize the loss of life and property, we must be prepared in advance and take correct self-rescue measures. First, in the face of extreme weather, we must improve our overall emergency preparedness. Coastal cities should establish a complete breakwater system, reinforce offshore buildings, and protect infrastructure. Issue heavy rain and tide warning information and provide evacuation guidelines for residents in potentially affected areas. At the same time, we reserve disaster relief materials and form a professional rescue team. Secondly, always pay attention to the wave forecast issued by the weather station to understand the direction, time, and possible height of the huge wave. Different protective measures are taken for different warning levels. For example, temporarily close road traffic near the coast and evacuate offshore buildings. When heavy rain strikes, you should evacuate the seaside area as soon as possible to avoid casualties. In addition, if you encounter a sudden huge wave and it is too late to evacuate, the first priority is to quickly evacuate windows and buildings at lower altitudes, away from the coast edge, estuaries, or low-lying areas. Look for shelter inside tall, solid buildings, especially high-rise concrete buildings. At the same time, pay attention to the radio to learn about the progress of the disaster. More importantly, try to avoid watching the waves toward the coast at this time, let alone get close to the seaside breakwater. Because the rip currents caused by huge waves can easily sweep people into the sea. If you are already in the sea, be sure to move away from the coastal area quickly. Use buoyancy tools as much as possible and do not contend head-on with huge waves. On the other hand, when taking refuge indoors, doors and windows should be closed to prevent mud and branches from hurting people. Cut off water, electricity, and gas lines and lift valuable items. At the same time, prepare a first aid kit, daily necessities, and be prepared to contact the outside world. If trapped, draw rescue attention through open flames, horns, etc. What cannot be ignored is the need to remain vigilant after a huge wave passes through. Avoid getting close to waterlogged areas or loose soil to prevent electric shock or being buried. Visit neighbors to understand the disaster situation and implement follow-up rescue plans. Stay away from damaged buildings, check the structure of your own house, and dry wet items. When huge waves hit, sailors and tourists at sea face great life threats. How to respond correctly at this time not only tests self-rescue skills at sea, but also is the key to life and death. First of all, if you encounter sea surface abnormalities, such as large waves, riptides, or hear weather warnings, you must immediately initiate defensive preparations. For large ships, they should quickly adjust their course and try to stay away from areas with high waves and violent waves. Check whether equipment and facilities are operating normally, close non-essential doors and windows, secure deck items. All personnel should wear life jackets and be prepared for emergencies. Secondly, small maritime vehicles face greater threats. You should immediately turn around and return to the coast and seek refuge in relatively safe waters such as bays and harbors. At the same time, evacuate non-essential personnel, secure deck supplies, put on life jackets, and prepare to abandon ship. If you are unable to return to the shore, you must avoid the main attack direction of the huge waves and minimize the impact surface. What cannot be ignored is that when a huge wave hits, large ships must try their best to meet the wave, Keep their heads in the direction of the huge wave and minimize the impact surface on the side. Start all maneuvering devices at the same time to increase power output and ensure operability. Close all hatches to prevent water intrusion. All members held on to the fixed objects, lowered their bodies, and tried to maintain balance. In addition, the boat must adopt the offshore drifting method at this time. That is to say, anchoring makes the hull float to the offshore side, and it can face the huge waves sideways as much as possible to reduce direct impact. All personnel tied on lifelines, hugged objects in the center of the hull, kept their heads as close to the deck as possible, and tightened their limbs. Wait for the big wave to pass. It is worth noting that when encountering unexpected situations, such as mechanical damage, hull rupture, etc., it is not advisable to forcefully contend with huge waves. You should immediately abandon the ship and jump into the sea, and quickly stay away from the capsized hull to prevent being swept into the bottom of the ship. At the same time, try to gather floating objects to form a large floating platform. The staff huddled together for warmth and looked after each other. Determine the distance and direction from the shore based on the scene and wait for rescue. We must remind you that if you are on a drifting object, you should try to stay away from the central wave and use flags, shouts, flares, etc. to attract maximum attention. If you encounter other people who have fallen into the sea, rescue them immediately. At the same time, keep a clear head at all times, never give up hope, and firmly believe that the outside world is coming to rescue. When huge waves hit coastal communities, residents must make all-round defense preparations in advance to protect life and property. First of all, you must understand the tide forecast and determine the direction, time, and tide height of the huge wave. Scientifically delineate storm surge risk areas for coastal communities based on the size of giant waves. For high-risk areas, river banks should be raised and buildings reinforced according to flood control standards. Close the basement to avoid flooding. Secondly, before huge waves hit, the breakwater system should be activated, wave-proof fences should be erected, and underground passages should be blocked to prevent seawater intrusion. At the same time, the power supply in low-lying areas near the coast should be cut off, high-risk buildings should be evacuated, and important equipment should be moved to higher places. When evacuating, be sure to avoid waterlogged areas and loose soil. In addition, residents should pay attention to the evacuation alerts issued by local governments and evacuate to designated shelters quickly. On the way, you should choose inland highlands and stay away from coastal buildings. Self-driving cars should avoid flooded roads and pay attention to potential risks of water accumulation and collapse on the road. When evacuating on foot, avoid secondary disaster points such as broken telephone poles and leaning trees. At the same time, if there are still residents in the community who cannot evacuate, they should enter the concrete high-rise building as soon as possible and stay away from the windows. At the same time, water, electricity, and gas pipelines were cut off, furniture was fixed, valuables were lifted, disaster relief supplies were stocked, and contact with the outside world was established. When huge waves hit, stay away from lower altitudes to avoid getting trapped. Thereafter, residents should continue to pay attention to weather warning information and judge the timing of the huge waves to recede so that they can return home in an orderly manner. After demobilization, the house structure should be inspected immediately to deal with potential secondary disasters such as leakage and pipe rupture. Also clear the roads and avoid traffic accidents. Once building damage is discovered, it should be reported to the relevant departments immediately. Thank you for liking, leaving a message, subscribing and turning on the little bell. We will update the latest news from around the world every day. Continue to use a scientific perspective to explore the complex truth behind meteorological events.